Hey, this is Ralph. In this video, I want to experiment a little bit more with functions in JavaScript, and this time I want to return values from a function. Okay, so I've got a page set up, and there's not much on this page. Simply, I am using a couple of text boxes, which I'll use to get some input from a user, and I do have a button which will call a function. But those don't do anything yet, so let's go ahead and get to work. I'm going to go ahead and work in the lower part of the body of my page, and I'm going to be declaring several functions. My first function is going to be add formula, and I'll be passing a couple of arguments, but instead of actually performing the task right here, the purpose of this function is simply to contain a calculation, a formula, and I'm going to return x plus y. Now similarly, I'll go ahead and make another one here. This one I'll just copy and paste. This is going to be my subtract formula, and I can do the exact same x and y, but of course this needs to be x minus y. Now I'm going to want to return this because I don't want the action to get performed with the function right away. I just want it to hold on to this information for later use, and I'm going to have another function call this function so it can run the formula. And let's see, I'm going to go ahead and create the bigger function, which will be my do math function. And this is going to have several things in it where I'm also going to be declaring some variables. So I'll go ahead and declare a variable called n1, and this is where I'm going to reference my text boxes right up here, num1 and num2. So I'll simply do document.getElementById, and that's num1, and I want to get the value from that. However, because the values default to a text box and I'm going to be doing some calculations, I'm going to use the built-in number method to make sure that the value of this text box is converted to a number. And then I can do the exact same thing for number box 2, which is n2, num2. And by the way, get element by ID, num1 and num2. That's just because those are the IDs of those text boxes right there. So I want to get those information in numbers. I'm also going to declare a variable of sum, and this is where I'm going to take my formula, which is a function from before. I'm basically declaring a variable that's going to actually be my function. My function is going to be represented by this variable sum. And I want to pass the arguments n1 and n2. And of course I can do the same kind of thing for a variable sub is equal my subtract formula n1 and n2. So I now have these little variables, sum and sub. They represent functions that are, they're representing values which are functions, and those functions contain formulas. So for instance, just focus on the addition formula here. The sum variable represents my add formula function with n1 and n2. n1 and n2 are coming from values in a particular text box. And of course, the add formula function described up here is returning the mathematical operation of x plus 1. X plus 1 is the equivalent of n1 and n2. I know this is kind of a weird combination of passing arguments and returning information, but it is kind of nice when we have not addition and subtraction, but more complex formulas or calculations that we want to hold. Now, returning statements doesn't have to be math formulas or numeric values. It can be text strings as well. So we hold all kinds of things, table arrays. Okay, so I think I'm doing pretty good, but I do need to display some results. So I'm also going to do a console log of the sum and a console log of the sub, and that will conclude that function. But I also need to call this function on click, so I'll do a little event listener down here. Document.getElementById, and this is going to be my calc button. Add event listener on click, and I'm going to do math. Okay, So when I click the button, and notice my button is identified as Calc button with a capital B there. So when I click that button, I'm going to do the math function. Do the math function does several things. It declares some variables, getting values for my text boxes. It starts to call the addition and the subtraction formulas by passing those variables in1 and in2, passes them through to where I have these formulas stored as return statements. Okay, let's test it out. Control S to save. Head on over to the browser and refresh. And I'll go ahead and type a 10 in here and a 6 over there, and I'm going to do the math. And off over in the console log over on my right side, let me zoom in a bit more on that so you can see it really well. There we go. We can see that I'm getting 16 and 4. 10 plus 6 is 16. 10 minus 6 is 4. And of course I can change these values out to 50 and 30. Do the math. And we get our correct responses of 80 and 20. There we go. So that is returning values from a function, also a little bit of passing arguments to a function, and of course we can use one function to, in effect, call other functions and have all that information displayed to our users. Take care.